saving liberal democracy in 14 minutes, so that's quite a task. So let's see what we can do about it. So when we look into the last years, the last 2 years basically, we saw the rise of Donald Trump in the United States, and we saw Brexit in the United Kingdom, but we saw also other movements, amongst others the Alternative for Germany in this country, that tried to question the narrative of liberal democracy. How did they do that? Well, these populists used, as there's a common agreement about it, the fear of the people, the fear of change, and the things to come in our future. Well, basically, all of these movements, they hate innovation and technological progress. They also hate quite a bit human dignity and human values and human rights, as we just heard in the talk earlier. Basically, they oppose everything that has been built within the last 70 years in the so-called West and beyond. So they exploit the fears of people. Why do they do that, and how can they do that? So, well, this leads to the question, what makes us going as society, as people? Well, and I would say we run mostly on narratives. Narratives that define ourselves, our values, what we stand for, and how we try to conduct and live our lives. Well, one of these narratives is around work and the future of work and how we live in our societies. And, well, these populists that we have seen emerging, they oppose globalization. They also hate the internet quite a bit. And so basically that's something that they all have in common. So when we look into the future of work, we see that the narratives that we know are questioned, let's say, to the rise of artificial intelligence, more automatization, what we call Industry 4.0. So, well, in many countries, work has a decisive place in the public understanding and identity. When I lived at Harvard, and Lawrence is with us, he can maybe prove of what I'm now saying, it's a very Puritan place. It's very much shaped by the Protestant working ethic. It's a totally secular place, but people spend like every introduction of every conversation about how much work they have to do. And they love this, and they love to emphasize on how much they have to do. So it's so Puritan and so Protestant that if you have a lunch and you may have some sparkling water, this is seen as utterly hedonistic, because that's not necessary that you have like sparkling water, right? So, but now imagine in such a context, when you question work and the future of work and the identity, well, that means something. Because now what we see with the populist movements, it's not only attacking, let's say, the average Joe, so a worker. We have been seeing people voting from also other walks of life. And there is quite a big debate about how much jobs may be lost in law firms, in hospitals. So all of that, like jobs that seem to have been safe. So what are we going to do in the future when there is an abundance of free time? Are we all going to be painters or poets? Well, or musicians, giving this place. So why not? But coming back to the narratives, there is an Israeli historian, Yuval Harari, and he recently wrote a piece in the New York Times where he argued people will just engage in so-called virtual realities. They may be playing games all day long. And, well, to whom this sounds way too fantastic, Harari has an answer. He says, well, we play these games all our human existing long. He calls them the religions. So a religious person may see a higher force or an angel at work, where an atheist basically sees nothing. So, well, Harari, when it comes to religion and narratives, already wrote a book about it. It's called Homo Sapiens, A Brief History of Mankind. So, just to let you know, if someone writes a book where it says in the title brief, it's most probably a lie. So the book is like this, it's 500 pages, and it really takes you a long time, but it's worth. But let me give you an executive summary. So when it comes to narratives, when it comes to what makes us people go, whenever we want to collaborate on a level that is bigger than our family, we need these narratives, and there's basically two narratives. One is gossip, and the other is mythology, or religion. So it's basically Brangelina, and in these circles, the flying spaghetti monster, or heaven and earth, all the tidings about our society. So these narratives have two purposes. So one is you want to know who is around you. You want to just talk about the people that may share the larger stage with you. So that's where all the gossip comes from. And wherever I give the talk, and be it in Mexico or India, people know who's Brangelina. So Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, they get divorced, all that. What about the children? So there is a global gossip about this. And now mythology, religion. There is, of course, let's say, we know, some of you may know some stories of the Bibles. Also, in other religious contexts, they have tidings that quite everybody who is an adherent of this cultural hemisphere does know. So from this, there emerges music, poetry, literature, but also philosophy, and also political ideas. And this political philosophy, these political ideas, they form basically the framework, the fabric of our societies. And other than gossip that wanders around from India to Mexico about Brangelina, those political religious narratives, they are exclusive. They are meant to be confining a certain group of people, okay, bigger than a family, but not all mankind. So these political narratives, when they use, let's say, biblical references, it's not about how often people may or may not engage in religious practice. It's about the framework of our societies, and it's mostly about power and loyalty. So the debate about whether or not Muslims are part of European societies, it's not about how often they go to mosques. It's about the belief that if they do not share our narratives in the West, they may not be capable of loyalty to the order they now live in. So that's basically what we see in today's debate about xenophobia. These narratives, these societal narratives, political, religious narratives, they are mutual exclusive, and they also use something which is very important when you want to understand the threats to liberal democracy these days. They use a rhetoric which is us versus them. Because as you need the loyalty to the group to understand where this group goes to, what's their purpose, what is the stories they tell at the bedtime stories. So you need to be sure that there is a loyalty. So, but then you just realize there is people who may or may not share this, and this is when you then oppose them and you make your group, your own group, and versus the other. There has been in the 70s of the last century a social psychologist, Henry Teifel. He created a theory of social behavior, and he actually came along with a certain proof. So if you are about the opinion that if we only get rid of religion, then we will not have this us versus them anymore, you are totally wrong. So what Teifel did, he did experiments with kids. And these kids would sit just in a room, and they were allegedly playing a game. They would not know their teammates. They would also not know the mates of the opposing team. But what they would do, they would always prefer the teammates of the teammates, their partners, even though they have never seen them, and they also knew they will never play a real game. So what Teifel came about with this theory of social behavior, he was just saying this us versus them is so deeply ingrained in our nature or in our behavior, so to speak, that it is paramount to understand politics, and it's also like in our time. So clearly we have seen after the end of World War II, 70 years, big efforts to overcome this us versus them rhetoric. However, in times of despair, in times of uncertainty, in times where you do not know what the future is going to be, you may return to this rhetoric, to this idea of us versus them. There's another dude who wrote a book, Alvin Toffler, and it's a very good book. It's called The Future Shock. And basically all it means is in the title. He argues there may be times where technological progress will accelerate so much that the average Joe and the intellectual alike, they may not be capable of comprehending this sort of accelerating progress. And if we look into our time today, and I mentioned already the future of work, we may be at a point where there is a backlash. We have been seeing this backlash in the elections in the United States and in England. Luckily, France went and the Netherlands went on another path, but I think it's still valid to see that when there is a time like ours where we do not know precisely what the future is going to be, this us versus them rhetoric re-enters the political stage. So this us versus them is quite a thing that you can prove and see over history. Let's say in the medievals, where you had like the Jews that were like responsible for everything that went wrong in medieval European societies. And you just fill the gap and you just jump into present day. You have the United States, where the Mexicans are the villains. You have the United Kingdom, where the Polish workers are the villains. You look in the whole of Europe, and you have the Muslims who are the villain. You look into Turkey, where the Kurds and the believers of the Gülen movement are the villains. And you look into Russia, where the homosexuals are the villains. And you could go even further into India, and you have like a Hindu national government, or a party, a Hindu national party forming the government that also like neglects the basic rights to the Muslim minority of the country. So this scapegoating that you can see in minority groups, there is a French philosopher, René Girard, and he examined this theory of scapegoating, and he found out that like quite every society runs to one or the other extent on that. It is basically in our archaic sort of ideas of what Max Weber would call like early stages of religiosity, which is very superstitious, very archaic. And who would deny that there is a connection when you see like the populists of our day just preferring the easy answer right away all the time, and to this superstitious archaic sort of motives from our early days on when we were humans. So what you basically can say when you want to combat like all these populists from all over the planet, I was just like referring to a few of them, it's basically what they do not like in the debate about fake news, political correctness. It's just like they see a conspiracy going on, a global conspiracy against this us versus them. It was good back in the good old days where you could just be like a white male and you would derogate women. You would, of course, try to oppose your religious ideas on others. You were, of course, homophobe, and you could just like brag and make all these jokes. And now these people, like others, they just want to take that from us. Well, I mean, a liberal order just like tries to get rid of these us versus them rhetoric, and also from this scapegoating. And this is basically all my talk, what it's about. This is how we can save liberal democracy, by realizing that it's just not only a joke. It's just like we have to understand and still go on that learning that these divisive narratives are the first step in breaking up a liberal society, a liberal democratic order. When we look just 50 years back, and this is my closing remark, you may remember this one photo that has been shot by Apollo 8 on Christmas Day of 1968. It's called Earthrise. It shows basically our sweet tiny planet from outer space for the very first time. And this sparked movements in peace movements. It also sparked environmental movements throughout the planet. Because what we today know as a given is just like, oh, this planet is really rather tiny, and we are all on there. So, well, if we look out from space, let's say from God's or the universe or the flying spaghetti monster's perspective, it's quite really a tiny place to really crawl about all that stuff we do all the time. So I would really argue that this, let's say, this global identity, I would call it, that has emerged after the Second World War, and by the way, Europe and 70 years of peace is the best proof of it. Well, this global identity is something that carries a richness and a fullness to our human existence. And now these populists, like where we may be inclined to give in, because they call us elitists, because we just believe in this, because we just look at this photo from Earth and say, whoa, maybe we may not be so different after all. So to conclude, I mean, honestly, we have to fight this populists that try to re-embark on a ship that sails into nowhere. And we as Europeans know it after 2 Second World Wars and the Shoah, that divisive politics and an us versus them rhetoric does not really pan out. It's a shame and a disgrace. Now our generation, has to come up and find a new Earthrise moment. Thank you very much.